Hey y'all, welcome to Bugs in the Lip Gloss. It's Whiskey and my friend Brenda. Thank you again for joining us one more time. I love that we keep coming back to be able to do this. And another amazing warrior woman who's here to share her story and her healing journey. And if you would, please introduce yourself.
Sure. I am Brenda Adelman. Thank you for having me. My healing journey. Oh, I have a picture, so I'll kind of show that from my one-woman show because a
Woo!
very big part of my Brooklyn Hamlet, a very big part of my healing was writing my story, seeing what I had lived through, having compassion for that person who lived through that, and then putting my story on the stage, which I have been doing for well over a decade now. Stages across the world and also virtually, and also I've done over 200 interviews, including on Fox, CBS, NPR, things like that, and startup podcasts, because the biggest thing for me is sharing my story. And I know that when I was going through it, I did feeling so alone in what I lived through was what was so debilitating for me. So my story being that my father, who I adored, shot and killed my mother back in 1985, and within months moved in with and then married her sister, my aunt,
Wow.
and went from, shock, losing my whole family in one night. I loved both of my parents intensely, to going to a place of, and within our inner guidance, realizing that I had to stop living in the past and asking why this happened, and instead look at how could I thrive and how could I go on now that this has happened to me. So that's been my path over the last 2 decades. Got a master's degree in spiritual psychology after putting a first version of my one-woman show, my book on Hamlet, up, because I was an actress when my mom died and I was hiding. I was in shame. I went back to acting about a year after she died, and I was hiding behind, the characters I would play. And then I had this inner guidance to tell my story on stage in class, not knowing it would be this one person show in public. And so when I did the show the first time, people laughed, people cried. I knew how to tell a good story. The end of it then was, will I ever love and trust again? But I didn't know how to take care of myself. I felt very lonely. I felt very depressed. And so I went, got a master's degree for 2 years in spiritual psychology, kind of is the foundation of what I teach in the healing work that I teach. And that's a little bit of it here. Oh, well, I have helped over 200 people. Just like a year before the pandemic, I really started teaching my process for telling my story on stage to others, and actually giving them a place to showcase their story, tell their story, heal themselves, heal audiences. So I have helped develop and direct over 200 people for the stage as well over the last few years.
That's amazing. And that's just so much to unpack right now. So
Yes,
a few details, if you don't mind. How old were you when this incident with
I
your
was
parents
30.
happened?
I was
30.
30.
So you were older already
I
as
was older. I had just moved to California. I had fallen in love and I was engaged, but I was extremely codependent with my parents, like there for them. So I really couldn't be there for myself. Like it was a huge step for me to move away. So yeah, I was an adult though.
so as you were growing up, were there any signs of this down the line, or was it a tumultuous household to begin with?
Very tumultuous, love, hate. But when you're growing up in that, you either think it's normal, anyway, it's your normal. I did not, I mean, as someone who's sensitive, I realized how much I um, overate, went out dancing, did all the wrong things as a kid, like just to get out of that environment. But I
Mhm.
was lucky enough to have really good friendships that kind of got me back on track. But there was a time when I was about 15. I remember that my mother, like, so I was very close with both of them, but they were just, it was not physical so much. It was that emotional abuse. My father, only in hindsight do I even understand this, was, gaslighting my mom.
Mhm.
And, um, and there were always guns. There were always guns, but it was more like we were in Brooklyn. It was like, this is just kind of a fun thing until it's not. And, guns are not toys. And I remember when I was 15, my mom, and there was a lot of sex. They were definitely having sex. It wasn't like they didn't talk to each other or anything like that, but there was also a lot of emotional violence. But I remember when I was 15, they must have had a fight, he actually, after the fact, I found out that she said he put a gun to her head. But when she came back, I just thought, I remember coming home, and this happened a couple of times though. One when I was 15, one when I was in my early 20s. I remember coming home and her like wanting to leave the house in a flurry really quickly and not telling me where she was going. And I was really close with her, and I was like, "Where are you going? Where are you going? Where are you going?" You know, as a 15-year-old. And I
Right.
remember her saying, "I hate you" to me, and it was so devastating because we were so close. And it turned out that was one of the times, I guess, he had put a gun to her head, and she fled to her sister's house. The irony of it, because this is the sister that he ended up marrying later on. But then when she came back, and that was the story I heard, I just thought she must be lying, because why would you go back to someone who is threatening you?
Mm-hmm.
Happens again later on, and only in hindsight did I understand domestic violence and understand, um, you know, more that I was in it as well, you know, as far as being trained and groomed and all this other stuff, you know,
Part of the
and
cycle.
and understanding how scary it was for my mother to stay or to go, you know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a couple things you said. Uh, you said hiding behind the character, like it was helping you cope, so you were hiding behind the character. And ironically, just the other day, I saw a show that was talking about Elizabeth Taylor and her depression after her husband died and all these things. And she said the only way that she could cope with what was happening in her life was she literally off stage too. She was staying in that character. Was it Cat on a
Oh,
Hot Tin Roof, I think?
oh, well, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof is not a fun character to stay in, but yeah,
Well,
she could have been.
it might have, no. I think so. It was because it was that
Because her husband's always rejecting her in that one.
but it
Yeah.
was that Southern debutante type character.
Oh, I see. That's always positive on top of it.
Right. So she was holding herself in that character for the longest time, even off stage, because she couldn't find a way to deal with her own life circumstances
Wow.
off of stage. So as soon as you said that,
Yeah.
that clicked with me.
And I think, I mean, what happened for me, and this is something like even before what happened with my mom and her death, was when I was in my 20s and I found acting, and all of a sudden I could jump into a character and I could express my anger. Like, and I was the type of person who didn't do that in real life. So it was so freeing. Like, acting can be so incredibly freeing, it can be healing. Yeah. And so then, you know, in my early 30s, when I was in acting class, I would just get into characters and actually express myself in a way that I wasn't. I was hiding in my life. Yeah.
Well, in between your spiritual teaching and your spiritual learning and my own, do you think, and I kind of had this, it just popped in my head, that empaths are really good at acting because, or can be, because when we're developing these skills as children, we're literally a chameleon. We learn how to mold into one of whatever our position is. We
Yeah, that's
learn how to
brilliant.
put that personality into whatever it was. I went to 8 schools in 12 years. So I was
Oh,
the
wow.
perpetual new kid, right?
Yes, I think
So,
that's brilliant. I hadn't thought about it like
yeah.
that, but absolutely, because we already know what it's like to play the role of someone who's invisible or someone who has to pretend things aren't happening that are happening, you know, things like that. So
Right.
as long as you're also healthy, you understand that, yeah, definitely. I can
We
understand.
could,
It'd be interesting to do some kind of survey. Of course, people who don't are not very empathic usually don't say they're not very empathic, so it'd be hard survey too.
right. And right now there's such a I hate to say it this way, but there's such a fad of being an empath
Oh,
that
I know. I do
there are so
know.
many people that they might be on their journey, but they're not quite there yet, you know.
Not well, yeah, I do know what you mean.
I'm saying
It's
it nicely.
well, yeah, I think it's because maybe it's kind of like the same thing when people have there's like levels of storytelling, and maybe I think what happens with this whole empath thing is that like with storytelling, there's these levels that happen that at first you have this big life story and you think there's no way I can tell it. Nope, 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 you know, and you close down, which
I've
of
gone
course
through
you
that.
do eventually. Then the second step is I can tell my story. Oh my God, I'm going to tell everyone and their mother, and I don't even care if they're listening to me. You know, we're not conscious. I did it too in the beginning. It's
Mhm.
like, oh my God, this is what happened to me. This is what, you know what I'm saying? But we're not even checking in. And maybe that's before you move to the next step, which is,
Right.
taking responsibility for your energy and what you're saying and checking in with the person and still, sharing when appropriate. But I think that's probably what happens with empaths or people who all of a sudden understand that they've been covering up their ability to be empathic, and then they have it and they start feeling things. And so now it's all about what I feel versus, you probably know this too, it's like those feelings are guiding us to something versus being the truth of anything. And some of them are
Right.
tapped into past hurts instead of like, this is really your inner wisdom teaching you. Sometimes it's a past hurt, right?
Well, and
Maybe.
it's likened to a baby who learns how to walk, and once they do, you can't stop them. They're trying to go everywhere, even if they know whether it's
Right.
good for them or not. You know,
Right. So maybe is that what you mean, like with the empath?
yeah, like they're on this journey and they may not be aware, like they're so, like you said, they're so proud of where they're at because it's this new light, but
Right.
they don't have light on the whole picture. And where was I going with that? Oh,
Well, it
I
is kind of
digress.
like telling a story where you don't know where you're going with it. So you first say, well, this is this event that happened, and oh my God, I lived through this. Whereas like my storytelling developed, and the first time it was about then sharing with the intention behind that I'm going to be able to trust myself. Then it became into, okay, I'm going to forgive. I'm going to help other people forgive. But the first step is just like, bleh, here it is.
Right. And that's what I was going to say is one of those things that kind of tips me off that we have some healing to do when I deal with not deal with, when I help other women or guide other women,
Yeah.
is it's the ones that come out and go, oh, I'll tell you everything. I'm an open book. And I'm like,
Huh.
oh, sweetie. Okay. Boundaries number one.
Yeah, because I don't want to hear everything.
And you
And
don't need to tell.
I know I used to do that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did too. And it's like, I don't need to tell everything, and I've learned the more that you can rope that in and pull that bubble back a little bit more, the stronger it makes everything else because you're not so spread out and you're not just
Well, that's
dumping
why
all your trauma on everybody.
right. And that's why for me, teaching storytelling is so important too, because, if you're sharing everything, nothing is standing out.
Nothing is sacred.
Right. And then if you're not tying it into, well, what's the bigger life picture? What is it why did you have this event happen or these repeated events happen? What is that trying to tell you from your choices? Then you're sharing from a conscious place. So it's like you're sharing with your, inner guide, your witness watching versus the
Yes.
first step, which is just blah, there it is. And I did it all. And, there's something to be said for all of it. But, once you know better, like with everything, then it's like, that's why, I say, and I think this is a really important part of our storytelling. It's like, write your story down for yourself. Don't just share it out there because you don't know I just had a call with someone recently that I was shocked that she just like blurted all this stuff out. And the thing is, if I'm coaching someone, I know what's coming, but as an empath, all of a sudden, if unhealed stuff is coming at me, I really have to protect myself. And so sometimes I may even sound cold to someone, and I'm working on that. But it's like I know that the key is not in the unhealed energy. The key is in having your witness there, the key to healing and being able to share from that place. But it's
Well,
an
and
interesting.
that's part of our own healing journeys too, because we've had to build those boundaries and that healing process is really never going to end. So the more somebody pushes in, the more likely they are to hit something on you that you haven't healed yet, which actually helps
Right.
us.
Right.
But when we go, whoa, you're really close to that spot, then we know where that spot is. But we still have a right to protect that from other people.
We absolutely have a right. That's the whole thing. Like, I think, and it sounds like it was similar for you because I had no boundaries with my mother and father. And my whole first part of my life was like, how can I help them? How can I heal them? How can I be there for them? Which I was taught to do that. They would just unload on me that I am very fierce and like I am not there for someone else to just spew stuff at, which is interesting because I teach healing. But I think it's because of my master's program. They had a lot. That's where I really learned boundaries. And it was like, even for clients, it's like if you write out your stuff, and you should, it's not about suppressing that unhealed stuff. Write it out, but don't reread it because you are re-anchoring back in that stuff. and we want to all feel better. So we don't want to tell the same story with the same level of unhealed stuff over and over again, because then it just re-anchors it. You tell it, but then you heal a little bit each time you tell it, whether it's to
Right.
yourself or someone else, and that's the interesting thing about being on stage myself. And I get questions a lot of like, but are you reliving the pain? And it's like, and this is why I teach it, because in the beginning I was reliving the pain, wanting to be a good actress, but I am not a method actress. You don't need that. You can be an imagination. And so I'm not reliving it if I know it's, for right now, it's 2023. I'm on stage in Hollywood. There's a, there's an audience out there. I'm giving you the experience of being able to open your heart and look at your own lives and say, where can I heal?
And not only that, we're sharing scars, not wounds, right?
Right. Sharing scars,
We're
not wounds.
we're
Exactly.
showing you the backdrop of what has happened and where you are now. We're not showing you, you're not bleeding all over the stage, right?
Exactly. You got some good ones there. That is
You know?
exactly it. We're showing you the scars, not the wounds. And we are showing you the scars, because if you don't see the scars, then you're not healed as the audience. You're not touched. I'm not moved. If you don't give me something like that's real, it's also why I teach. It's like, but it's also the stages I went to. If I couldn't, like the very first time I did my show, I was still in an on again, off again relationship with my father. I had wanted to take my own life, but was like, I didn't want to share that with people, that I was still filled
Right.
with shame. So I would go right to humor. It's like I tell them and then I go, bye, which of course is not a great experience for anyone. Like, sure, you can get into the joke, but the actual healing, which is the most important thing for me, I rushed it. So then the audience doesn't have a moment to think about their own life and have the actual cathartic experience. So it's very nuanced, but yeah.
Right. Absolutely. There's a couple things you said. The first one you said, I've helped over 200 people, and I firmly believe that number is wrong because of
Oh, I'll tell you what I meant. Okay.
yeah, yeah. But the and that's simply because of the compound effect, right? We help one and it helps many. So that's the where I was going with
Right.
that.
Well, now it's so many more, because what I was thinking is that I've actually produced 200. So I've helped more people, like helping
Oh,
them with their
gotcha.
story, but I actually put 200 on the stage. But when you think about the compound effect of those people that I even saw on stage, that is thousands right there. So that is
It's
great.
infinite. We have no idea of knowing where that 1 second of energy where somebody had a light bulb, where that goes or where that stops. We have no idea. We will never, ever, ever, ever know. We just
Yeah,
know
that's
that it's cool and
great.
it's awesome and let it happen.
That is so
Right.
great. That's that ripple effect. Yeah. And you don't even know.
Absolutely. And then a couple of questions. I'm going to take you back. Um, First of all, your dad married your mom's sister. Like, could you explain how that works? Because somebody
I
will
think
be
it's
like, how did
backwards.
you leave that out?
I
Yeah.
wrote a book too. How did I leave that out? Oh, I didn't say
No,
it in the
like if
beginning.
I don't ask that question, people are going to ask me how I left that out of the
Yeah, which is
conversation.
interesting, because when I've done the show, I do Q&As afterwards, and I would say half the people are so angry at my father for what he did, and then the other half are like, but wait, he married her sister married him. They're more angry at that, because everybody comes with their own experience and their own betrayals.
Right.
Yeah, he moved in with her. Like, he moved in with her within the month. My father definitely was a cheater, and there was another woman that he had left my mother for a year before, but then they got back together. um Possible the other woman had something to do with my father's death, and that's why he steered clear with her. My other aunt that I'm close with, we think that they must have had an affair years before. My father was definitely a sex addict. From the stories I heard about her from my mother, I would say she was too. Not a lot of empathy going on for either of them.
Hmm.
Um, my father had a lot of money, and she was a widow and didn't have much. And, you know,
It was
that's all.
another codependent relationship.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I could, in some weird way, I could, like, my parents loved each other in some weird way, like not what I would call love, maybe codependence. There was something there, obviously a soul contract or something like that. In some ways, her older sister was like her, but more of a fit for my father, I guess, and that my mother was a bohemian and free spirited and And my aunt was not. She was more of like a homemaker type. And I don't know.
There's some things that questions can never be answered because we're
No,
not
but if I
fed.
want to give it like a bottom line thing, my father had money and she didn't. And my
Right.
father, like, you know, I feel like there was definitely mental illness there with my father as well, even though, he was a big businessman and all this stuff doesn't mean anything. I know there was mental illness there. Um, Not a diagnosis of it. There could have even been like multiple personalities or something like that with my dad. And narcissism, all stuff, I learned afterwards, and sociopathy and stuff like that. But what was my point now? There was a point. Um,
No, it was just, the relationship and how that happened. And we just said it was more of a codependent.
oh, I know, because
Oh,
my parents were talking about getting a divorce. In New York, it's very hard to get a divorce without like losing a lot of money. And so I think money was the reason. And then there was a lifetime, because they were married for 30 years, of blaming each other for maybe things that weren't working in their lives and stuff like that. And my father was kind of a gangster and had all these mafia connections and stuff like that. And like guns were cool. It was Brooklyn back then. And I just
mhm,
think that combination of things is
right.
what happened.
So was he ever prosecuted?
So he was prosecuted on a plea bargain, involuntary manslaughter, because his gun, I say this, it was the gun that I learned to shoot on. We still all go target shooting. That gun and his other guns that he had were never found. There were 8 hours before the police were called. And without the murder weapon, there was a possibility. The DA said that he wouldn't go to jail at all. And so at the time, my brother, who is my half brother, it's not his father, because I was just out of it. Like I didn't want to take my father to court either at the beginning. Um,
Mhm.
we agreed to a plea bargain of 2.5 years for involuntary manslaughter, because without the murder weapon, like I said, the DA said he might get off scot-free. So it was 2.5 to 5 years, and he served 2.5 years and got out for good behavior.
Wow.
2.5 years for shooting my mother in the head, killing her. Yep.
Wow. And I'm not grinning because that happened. There's so many different correlations with things. I've been through a court case where he got 18 months suspended. He left me for dead. And
The domestic violence thing. Oh,
there's so many different interviews that I've done with ladies where there has been zero prosecution. It's just, in a lot of these cases, it's because it's domestic and they're married.
yep.
It's
It's insane. Like if it
insane.
was someone else and they shot and killed them, would it be 2 years? Like what?
Yeah, it wouldn't have been if it was a perfect stranger. It probably wouldn't have been, just
Right,
based on the patterns that we've seen.
right.
And with
Definitely a broken system.
it's a very, very archaic, broken system. Um, and with all of that, you said that you had kind of gone into yourself and didn't know how to deal or what to do yet because of the shame. Like, can you explain that? Because it wasn't your doing, right? You were
Right.
a victim of the circumstance. So where does that shame come from? Where did that shame come from
Right. I did a
you?
lot of work on this because I
Right.
went for my master's degree. I was shocked that I felt shameful and that I felt like I had to forgive myself. It was like, what? Some of the things that came up for me was, I trusted my father. How could I have trusted my father? How could I have loved my father? How could I have trusted him? And then, of course, with the inner work was like, well, of course I did. That's my father. And I was groomed to, and he was my authority. So I chose to believe his lies. Well, why didn't I want to see the truth for what it was immediately? Well, because my emotions were protecting myself. They were protecting
Mm.
me until I needed to look at the truth and had the ability to see it and have the support that I needed. So, the shame came, I actually think a lot of the shame came from knowing the truth that my father did this and denying it for almost 2 years. Because I feel like if we're not in integrity with ourselves, we are going to feel shame.
Well, not only that, but you've seen the backside of all the years before that of things that had happened. So, like, this is me interjecting. When it's possible, when we see things and things happen, we can look back and they start lining up and they start clicking. And you're like, no, this fits this and this fits
Of
this.
course,
So
of
I know
course.
this, but how did I miss that? Right.
Well, I think, but I did look at that. It's like, of course you miss it because you never think someone's really going to kill them.
Mhm.
You just don't think, just like people are like that with everything. They're just not going to do something and then it happens when you're not brought up in a conscious way, right? That's why
Right.
people are, well, why don't they leave? Why don't they do this? Why doesn't that person lose weight if they're sick? Why don't they quit like, because you just don't think until you're conscious and you understand that how things work.
Okay.
Um,
Yes. So when speaking of knowing and understanding, what changed in you? What flipped between that shame to it's time to heal this and it's time to do something else? What
yeah.
was that catalyst?
Yeah, I guess it's almost like someone hitting rock bottom in another way. For me, it was literally my father got out of prison. So I was still like caught in, I love him, I hate him, I love him, I hate him. I'm going to believe him that just was an accident. Okay, I keep asking him what happened, but he keeps denying it. But I love him so much. He's my father. So I can't leave, I can't lose both of them. To when he got out of prison, a little before he got out of prison, because we'd speak and then we'd not speak because I'd ask him questions and he wouldn't answer. And then when he got out of prison, we were speaking on the phone. I was in LA. He was in New York, living with my aunts and that side of the family. And he was being really nice. And like my inner child, it was before I finished my master's in spiritual psychology, was like, oh, my father. And we're having a conversation, and he says that he is going to have my lawyer call my lawyer about getting 1/3 of the money that my mom had left me. That was the moment, because my brother had wanted to take him to court, civil court, for a few years, and I
Oh,
just was like,
the audacity.
the audacity. And that was what it's like. Sometimes you just got to have it in your face, and I was just like, wow, my father, the one I'm wanting to come back, the one who I'm like, oh look, he loves me, it's all bullshit. And it's just that he wants his money. And so I called my lawyer and had the case, the case started. And with that, he took off with my aunt. They relocated. I never saw him again. So it was like, I actually needed that boundary. Talk about an outer boundary. I needed it then because I was not strong enough for whatever reason to just set that healthy boundary. So making that choice, because I made the choice, did that. So that was what did it.
Right. And see, I'm going to go kind of metaphysical on you here,
Okay.
but my own father it had been this huge, he was diagnosed a clinical psychopath. They did psych evals on both my parents for a custody case.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he actually came back and bragged to me that these people are ridiculous because they're saying I'm a psychopath. And I'm like, no, I can see that because
Well,
at 15, I was the one that started the custody case with my mother.
oh,
Okay. So he's coming back and filtering this back to me that he's a psychopath. And I'm like, yep,
yeah, I know
totally
that.
are.
Right.
You know,
Yes. Well, I would say my dad was, yeah, sociopath, probably psychopath, since he
yeah,
killed my mother. Yeah. Hmm.
right. And they escalate, right?
Oof.
So I went
Yes.
through I had already started my own healing journey just because the bottom had fallen out, which I say rock bottom is where you stop digging. Um,
Good.
but I had started my
At
own journey
15?
with this. Well, that I was 40. I hit 40 and the whole bottom just fell out and I had to figure my way back of everything. And then he died when I was 45,
Okay.
44 or 45. And just this last year, I had repressed memories come back that were like 43 years old. This whole
Wow.
thing just popped open in my head. Realized,
Wow.
yeah, realized that my gifts are way bigger than what I was giving myself credit for because I was suppressing them. And
Interesting, because he's
yeah,
gone already for a few years and you're like, you still were suppressed. Because sometimes when the person dies, you actually open up sooner, but you're protecting yourself?
right.
Huh.
And I was actually going through it was a childhood trauma story guided meditation that would take you to your oldest trauma story that
Yes.
starts that story for kids. And then they
Yes.
take you back one further to your happy memory. So you
Right.
get unstuck from that
Right.
spot. And
Right. Yes, that
that's
makes
what
sense.
finally opened it up. Well,
Wow.
yeah. So while I'm living through the aftermath of that that crash that came through, I hear this voice in my head that said, you can work as hard as you want, but I'll always own your happiness.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden, all those puzzle pieces, like you were talking, everything started clicking back. My entire life of every time I'd built myself up to this level, he'd pull the rug out my entire
Wow.
life. And I'm like, oh, you son of a bitch, I am so done with you. And
Wow.
I've never had anything come through again, ever.
Amazing.
And it has just kept this. I mean, look what I'm doing now, right? So I
Right.
started steamrolling forward once I got past that point, that boundary. And
Right.
it was just this last December.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
I totally understand on an energetic level what you're talking about. Like it's those filters and those boundaries and those things that we don't necessarily see right away.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah, because of all the old shit that hasn't been healed. It's
Mhm.
like, because right until that moment, I didn't even know it. My inner child was still like, my dad's back. Like I say, I speak about it very clearly now, but I didn't know that was running me. And it's interesting. I don't know, this probably happens for you too, is that, then I went on to get the master's in spiritual psychology, and I did shamanic journeys, and I did acupuncture, and I did, clearing the bonds and stuff like that. And still, when he died a couple of years after that, I grieved. Like there was
Oh,
still my inner child, even though I thought, oh, I got this. I'm never going to see him again. That's great. Blah, blah, blah. I allowed myself to grieve, but it was
mhm.
shocking to me. But I also had a level of liberation I never had when he was alive. But I
Yeah.
believe we can teach people and model for people so they can have that liberation before someone dies.
Well, and part of it is we have to grieve what we expected it to be. We have to
Right.
grieve
Exactly.
what we built it up. And I taught inner city schools for years. And one of the things that you learn about these kids, because they're all in, not all, but there's so many in broken homes and surrounded by trauma. And no matter what is happening around them, their parent is their parent.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah,
They don't separate the two. It's
right.
not dad did this or mom did this. It's
I
that's my mom,
know.
that's my dad.
I know. It was interesting because I'm just seeing a generational thing here. When my mom died, I remember looking through I was cleaning things up and looking through her notebooks, and she had done all these self-help things and,
Mhm.
est and everything. And I remember reading something, which must have been something from like the forum or est. And it was about how much she loved her father and was so upset when he died. And I remembered him to be a freaking bastard, like an abuser, horrible shit. And I'm like, what? Because I never understood when he was alive, when he died, that she just was torn up. And then it was, just generationally, I'm seeing how when my dad died, I was really grieving, and I didn't get a lot of like condolences from people. And one of my friends was like, well, I didn't think you need that. And it's like, it's still my dad. And for me, I had a lot of loving relationship, a lot of loving in it when we were growing up. And when
Mhm.
I was growing up, like I didn't know he was a narcissist. So I didn't know it was always like, well, because he was a hero to me, that it was so loving. I
Right.
didn't know that later on. So one of the things I do say is like, I feel lucky because I got so much loving, and I didn't understand that part of it. And I feel like that was a basis of like me knowing that I was lovable, whereas a lot of people might not have had as extreme an experience later on, but they also didn't know they were loved, innately.
Right. And like I explained to my son too, it drives me crazy. I call it the death pedestal. I've coined this term. It's called the death pedestal. And
Oh,
what it is somebody could be just the worst of the worst that you've known in your life. And when they die and you go to the funeral, everybody's like, he was such a great guy.
that's so weird.
And
Yeah.
even the ones who knew he wasn't a great guy,
Wow.
the construct is he was such a great guy. So
So
if you're
weird.
in like these abusive situations or anything like that, then you're sitting in a funeral home listening to everybody else build that person up,
Yeah, so
right?
crazy.
And it's just this weird calico mix of what the fuck, right? Like
Exactly.
you just
Oh,
you
exactly. Well,
and you're in shock because you're trying to filter your own things and be
yeah,
nice to those people.
yeah,
And
yeah.
part of my healing journey has been to understand
I
that
don't
to
know if I could be
those
nice to them, actually.
well, I
I
mean,
don't
that's
think so. Yeah,
That's
I wish.
that's the expectation of society, right? You're
Right.
supposed to be
Yeah.
civil and nice and and thank you. And for some reason, the grieving and the mourned are the ones consoling everybody else, which I also don't understand. But especially American society, we're really goofy around death.
Yeah.
But I've come to understand that I was getting mad about it because I was like, don't you see how these people are? How could you treat those people after death? And like the other thing is, don't speak ill of the dead. And I'm like, well, if they were a jerk in the life, why can't you say
Yeah.
they're a
I say
jerk
the same
after
thing
they
about
die?
writing and writers. It's like if you don't want to be written up as, as a
Yeah,
horrible person, act nicely.
yeah. But I
Also
had,
saying, everything's perspective, right?
well, and
Yeah.
that's what I was getting at is I had to come to make peace with the fact that the dynamics and the relationships that person had with someone else was
Yes.
likely not the same.
Yes. Yeah.
And then you have the whole uh it's not guilt. It's almost I don't want to say rage, but the word's rage there. But it's almost a rage of how come they got that and I didn't.
How come? Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. That happens a
But
lot.
that's the
That happens a
narcissistic
lot.
cycle too, right? Because they're so great to everybody else.
Yeah. I think honestly, where we are in the world, sometimes I just think that maybe half of society is narcissistic.
Oh
You know
yeah.
what
And
I'm
I mean,
saying?
we
But
all
they're
have
real.
narcissistic
I
tendencies.
know we all have tendencies like that, but I just mean sometimes, and I'm not even talking personal now, I'm talking on a more
Right.
macroscopic level when I think about the state of the world and how people just don't care about gun violence. They just don't care about things. They're always like, but this, or for money, or for righteousness, and they don't care about like the
Or they're
people.
so apathetic.
Yeah, and they're so apathetic, and I used to get very upset about it, and then I had this awareness, and I was like, oh, but maybe they actually are more narcissistic. Like maybe there are so many people because they were raised, however they were raised, they didn't get that connection they needed. And so a lot of society is like that. And so here's the thing, and this was one thing that really freed me around my father. When I got that he was a narcissist and a sociopath, and I got the narcissism before, when I realized that, I was free. I was like, I don't have to try to convince him. I don't have to try to educate him. He's never going to think like I think. He's never going to feel like I feel. And I was like, wow. And what happened was, and that was of course a few years before he died, then for me I was free to pour all that energy back into myself and my life and create my creativity and create my show and create my business and fall in love and adopt my son, because I wasn't putting energy into trying to change someone who, if I think of it as a mental condition, I'm not thinking it can even be changed, like not in a bad way, but in a way of like,
It is what
and
it is.
it is what it is. Like even in a way of like, okay, am I really right or are they right? Like, to each his own. Like actually, to give up the righteousness too has been a big lesson for me. Like using discernment and knowing that's not for me, but also being like, well, I'm not going to stay in the energy of I've got to teach everybody and change everybody and
Right.
give them a way to have more compassion. It's not my job. It is
It,
my job to hold, like I feel like, for a more kind universe. I do
right.
feel by owning our stories and sharing our stories and loving ourselves through it, we take the narrative of the world back. But yeah, yeah,
Well, and you just said, you feel like the world is half narcissist and people might go, "Oh, that is just so bad." And it's like, well, no, because if you understand energy, there is a balance, there is a dance. And so yin and yang is 50-50, right?
right.
So
And it,
it's very possible that that's it. And the problem is not actually the fact that there's narcissists. The problem might be that there are so many wounded and unhealed empaths.
that's true too. That is true too, right? Because it is
You're
oftentimes,
accountable.
yeah.
Yeah.
Unhealed empaths can take the role of victim to everything, and there's no power in being a victim to anything.
As I said
You know,
something to somebody the other day, I said an unhealed empath can do just as much damage as a narcissist
interesting.
because we can go scorched earth because we're trying to protect ourselves or because we're so reactive from our wounds that we're doing damage because we haven't healed ourselves.
Well,
I know. I know I've done things that I'm like, whoa, I should have not pulled that switch.
Well, I just remember years ago when I was unhealed, I in my old relationship, my whole thing was this was all unconscious at the time, but I identify with my mother versus my father because my mother was the victim, my father was the bully, and victims can make the case that we are kind people, whereas a bully is pretty outwardly not kind, usually victimizing themselves, right?
Right.
But I just remember having that awareness and also realizing that all the times I was in relationship to protect myself, I would shut my heart down versus lashing out, but shutting my heart down to someone is an act of being a bully. You know what I'm saying? So it's like,
Withholding,
right. And there's so many people who I know
which is
have been,
exactly what a narcissist does, by the way.
right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. But I'm identifying as I'm a victim to this other
Yep.
person and they're acting this way. So I'm going to hold, and it was all unconscious at the time. And I just remember having this awareness, thankfully, with my partner who helped me have it. I just was like, wow, like I was so unconscious. And that's the thing. It's everything's about bringing our unconscious behaviors and that wounding to the surface so we can heal them, because
Hmm.
it doesn't feel good to withhold love because you're withholding it to be feel safe, but then it turns in on itself,
You're
right? You
punishing
can't.
yourself.
Exactly. It just, if everybody would understand we all have the victim and the bully inside us, it would be much easier because the person who's a bully on the outside is usually feeling like a victim, and that's why they're acting out like that. And the person who feels like a victim and like, they, I'm sure, are either bullying themselves for things they didn't do or something like that, or bullying someone else.
And in the classroom, I used to always say, because I had some tough kids going through some tough stuff, and I used to always say, those who act the least lovely need the most love. Those
Right. That's
are the ones,
right.
those are the kids that are acting out because they need something. And all we are is just giant children. You
Yeah.
know, we're just
Yeah.
that inner child.
Hurts
We're
too.
still
Yeah.
acting from those wounds.
And that's that thing, that hurt people,
Hmm.
for sure. But,
It sounds cliche, but it's true.
yeah. And, here's the thing, it's also not our job to go out of our way to be loving on people who are treating you like a doormat, not hearing you, defending. Like, that's about the healthy boundaries and being like, you can also hold light and love for someone and not ever have them in your life. It's like, I forgave my dad, which means that, well, I took him to court from a place of self honor versus revenge.
Right.
Forgiving him meant that I did the work it took so that when I thought about him, my day wasn't wrecked. I didn't go right back into righteousness. I
Right.
wasn't in denial. I was like, oh, I could embrace and I could have compassion for him, knowing how he grew up, stuff like that. I can have compassion thinking about him when he was a little kid and stuff like that. And then I can have compassion for myself, and it just like it doesn't wreck my day, and I don't have to compartmentalize and not think about it. But I forgave him and I took him to court for wrongful death. So it's not like I said, okay, don't answer my questions, everything's fine, you're back in my life. Like, it's not like, okay, and I'm not gonna, you know, make a self-honoring choice too.
Right. And I got to the point with my dad where, posthumously, of course, that I can look back and I can see his wounds. Like I can, and I've learned to understand the patterns, with studying narcissists, because in order to study yourself as an empath, you have to understand the altar of that too, and that shadow.
Yeah.
And you learn that what things there are patterns of certain things that develop certain wounds in people that create that thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's genetic, but a lot of times it's a nurture thing,
Yes. Yeah.
or an abuse thing from them that they've had to bounce back from, and maybe they didn't bounce. So
Right.
I had to learn too. It's like I respect your wounds, but we have that boundary even after he's passed.
Yeah.
And I remember going to a church sermon years ago, and it stuck in my head. The title was "I forgive you, but you're not invited to dinner."
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
And just because you forgive somebody doesn't mean they're allowed back in your bubble.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and I know that you've written the book about forgiveness and you're teaching and coaching forgiveness and things now. So let's go ahead and go into what are you doing now with all of this?
Yes. Well, I actually started, so I had my one woman show that I started performing many, many, many years ago. I have a forgiveness ritual in there that I act out, something I did around my father. And then I had people that were like, but how did you forgive? And I had a minister that was like, can you teach people how to do this? And so I started leading workshops in person probably in like 2008, and started being a keynote at domestic violence coalitions, things like that. And I went and I wrote my book, and I was like, well, what was the process actually like? And so it's a 100-page book. My father killed my mother and married my aunts, Forgiving the Unforgivable. It's on Kindle. And right now, actually this week, this month, I have a 4-week program called Phoenix Rising, because I
Mhm.
feel like
I've seen it.
rising and not us. And
I have a huge phoenix on my leg. I get it.
Oh, wow. And that was channeled to me about 5 years ago. What happened was, from these 2 decades of doing this work, it was like the breath work, the tapping, the ho'oponopono, the
Oh, it works so well.
with
I'll have
what?
to the Ho'oponopono. That works
Yeah,
so well.
exactly. The taking of radical responsibility, the ability to have choices. Like, every bit of study that I've done and taught, I put into Phoenix Rising. And so it's about forgiving yourself, forgiving your mother or the feminine wound, forgiving your father, the masculine, the shadow part of the masculine, so that you can embrace all the good and integrate ourselves, and then forgiving God, because if we believe that, the universe isn't for us, we're going to have a crappy life. And so I'm actually teaching a live version of that. That's usually a digital training, but I started today. So whenever people watch it, it's going on right now. I'm still letting people in this week, but because week one is about self-forgiveness. And I decided to do that because I've really been focused on storytelling, and I do have a healing component to that always. But I feel like where the world is right now, I need to give what I know, what I've learned from, speaking and doing all these live workshops before. And, that's what's really in my heart. Like, how can I help? How can I help you to realize that that judgment that you have is hurting you? And I actually have practical techniques from my bag of tricks, of like, okay, well, how's that going to work for you? How do you free yourself? How do you go from just hating someone and feeling they're so wrong, to being open enough to love yourself, trust yourself, invite and attract people into your life that are on that same like healing level. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Happens. Here we are.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
it's showing that empathy and that love for people that you wouldn't have before, and not, drinking poison waiting for the other person to die, because it does not work.
It does not work. It
Does
does
not
not
work.
work. Your heart closed to even, one person who hurt you, it literally works as being close to yourself as well.
Mm,
And it's really hard to like stop and be with yourself if you're trying to like make sure you don't have to
filter.
think about that thing,
Right.
right? Or you'll achieve success and you'll be super lonely anyway, or you'll have one of many addictions because you
Or
gotta,
paranoid that somebody's coming to take it from you.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So
So
I'm going to backtrack a little bit, because you said even forgiving God. So because you blip past it and before anybody freaks out, would you explain what you mean by that? Even because I know it's part of your course, so you don't have to give a lot, but
well,
how do you
yeah.
how do you
What I
define that?
just, what I mean, so it's whatever God is for you. If you think there is something bigger in the universe that brings us all together or made us or something like that. I was not religious ever. I still don't consider myself religious. I consider myself spiritual. It's like whatever works and doesn't hurt anybody else, including ourselves. So I never had to like go back and heal the stuff about a punishing God, because I didn't grow up in those religions.
Gotcha.
Although I did grow up. I was Jewish, but I was not religious. And since all of this, I found my way into church religious science, Unity Church principles that are about positive universal force that moves in and through everything. And
Right.
so for me, and also over the years, it's like the reason I put that in is because if we believe that everyone is out to get us, or like this happened to us, because there is nothing, there's no reason or rhyme for anything. You can agree, you can totally believe that. Like, I'm not even preaching like my way is the right way. However, if you're open to believing that maybe it's not so chaotic and that there are lessons in everything and that things just happen and you move into acceptance, but if you also can believe that there's something bigger that we are like living into and through by our choices, it makes for a much happier life that is more at peace. And so with the 4-week program, it's about how do you have more peace in your life and create from that space. So that's what the forgiving God is, because a lot of people are very angry when someone they love is taken from them, when someone is sick, when some kind of horrific abuse happens and things like that. So it's like there is a place for conscious release of those emotions and acknowledgments of them, but it's about moving past that and then opening up to something big and what bigger. And in that part of my, because I have a 3-step process, in that part of my process, you know, the exercises are a lot about how do you get into gratitude, and maybe it's by being of service to someone else, right? Because there's always someone who's worse off and better than you. So if you can actually understand that. So like years and years and years ago, when I was the loneliest I ever was, a couple of years after my mom died, I had broken up with my fiance, probably because I just didn't want to be witnessed in my unbearable sadness. I started volunteering at a children's hospital during the holidays so that I could be there for someone else. That is the quickest way to take you out of, you know, your own stuff.
That is anytime I know that I'm lacking or I need something, I have to give to somebody else, because I know what I push out unconditionally is always going to come back to me, and it has never ever failed me. And
Exactly.
it's not of an ego trying to get paid back either. Like, I just
Right.
know whatever's meant for me is going to come back to me somewhere else, but I'm going to put this out there.
Exactly.
Always comes
Service.
back. Yeah.
Service is always the answer. So I don't know when this is airing. If it's airing sometime, let's see, it's May 22nd. If it's airing sometime this week, Phoenix Rising will still be open, and it's a live version of it. It is a do-it-yourself program otherwise. So like I'm in there every day as the participants are posting their assignments, because it's 30 days of lessons.
Right. And it's actually not, but if somebody is all with your vibe and what's going on, I'm sure there's something coming next, which is
Oh,
a great
yes.
segue
So, you know,
for
I have a free group, Soul Story Tribe. Hang out in there. Come to me on Facebook. I'm always on Facebook. Brenda Adelman. Ask me questions about this. Like, I'm
right.
more than happy to steer you in the right direction.
And on that note, what does your future look like? What are your plans, or what do you think is coming next?
As far as business or work,
Anything.
personal, I really do feel more guided to teach at a deeper level with this forgiveness work, because I've been very, very focused on storytelling, teaching my speakers how to act and stuff like that. And I love doing that. But there is going to be more of a focus on the healing stories at a deeper level, because I like working with anyone. I can tell you how to tell a story where you're unforgettable, but I feel like we need to take the narrative back in the world, and it starts with us. So I want to help people really heal their stories, so they're
Mm,
sharing it in a different way, and they're like on fire to change the world, like take the world back instead of from everything that's going on. And other than that, I'm engaged and living with my
hey.
fiance, and we're just looking at, you know, lots of plans for the future. We're not sure what yet, but there's definitely travel in my future.
Oh, that is so awesome. And with the taking the narrative back too, and my own thought process is the more authentic you are and the more you find yourself, the more your story is going to tell itself. Like,
Yeah.
because nobody else has your story.
And of course, as someone who teaches skills, I'm like, it will
Right.
tell itself, but you want the skills to
Right,
make it
right,
land. So
right.
here's the thing. That's the other thing I wanted to say. So I've been, the last time I performed my show was in 2021. 2 theaters in San Diego and 1 in LA produced it virtually because of the pandemic. I was touring through 2019 in person, and I'm really feeling the itch to get my show back up there again. So I'll
Mm,
probably be doing that as well, because I know well, first of all, it's so great to express ourselves on stage, like every part of ourselves. But also knowing the impact that it makes at this point, it feels almost selfish not to go back and share a bit more.
right. My ultimate goal is to turn this into public speaking engagements also. So Yeah, I
Great,
totally get that pull. I get that push and that pull. I understand that totally. So
great.
thank you so much, Brenda. It has just been so amazing to talk to you and for you to share our story, or our story, share your story,
Our
which
story, isn't it?
ultimately is our story, right?
Yes.
Share your story, and I will get your information from you and put your links and everything in the show notes and comments, whichever place people are watching this. And if you are interested in following and supporting my ministry on the road, keeping me on the road and helping me share these wonderful women, and there's a surprise coming. I actually am interviewing a man tomorrow too. So I'm so excited I was able to get that pulled in. But if you're ready to support the ministry and support my amazing guests, everything will be in the show notes. And I can't wait to see you on the next one, and keep on rocking.